feeling the rhythm, and suddenly it's feel like slow, and and it's not only about the inspiration and the feeling, and also the rhythm. And it's maybe thinking about it.
Yeah,
so.
I mean see, one of the things that often we fall into dullness in practice is because we sort of lose interest. So there's little things like that that can keep our interest. Like, for example, the counting, we can even make it a challenge. You know, how many sets of 10 can I do without getting distracted? And then it becomes a challenge, it becomes interesting, because let's see what I can do, you know. Or to notice the rhythm of the breath. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I wonder what's going to happen next. So these sorts of things can also help to maintain the interest on the practice. And of course, what you can do even with the counting is to make it a little bit more complex, like count 1 up to 10 and then 10 back to 1, things like this. Because otherwise it can become very mechanical and then you just switch off and you get dull again. So anything like that that can maintain, of course, ideally we're interested because we see the benefits of the practice, you know, but on top of that we can have these sorts of things to help maintain the interest in the practice. But what we need to be careful with this, of course, is to not manipulate. It's so easy that when we focus on the breath that we manipulate the breath. That's our tendency. So if we notice that we're manipulating, trying to make it rhythmic or whatever, we just let that go as much as we can, because it'll just interfere with the practice. So it probably will happen because that's our tendency, but just let it go, let it go, let it go. That's all. On that point, also with counting, some traditions, instead of counting, they talk about noting the breath. So instead of counting, you would note, you would like mentally go breathing in, breathing out, or in, out. That's okay as well. Now, whether you use counting or noting, keep it simple. Otherwise it becomes elaborate commentary. Then it's just another distraction. So we don't want to go into any elaborate thing. So keep it as simple as possible and only use it if you find it beneficial, and then only bring it in when necessary. Don't sort of use it all the time unless you really have to use it all the time. So you can just bring it in when and if you find it helpful. If you don't find it helpful, just leave it out. Anything else anyone would like to bring up?
Is it possible to do the counting after the exhale and not the inhale?
Yes, but the question was, is it possible to count at the end of the exhale instead of the inhale? Yes, but often what happens when we count after the exhale, we tend to sort of manipulate the breath even more. But yeah, I mean, if you find it works better, that's fine. But generally, at the end of the in-breath seems to work better for most people. But if you find that it works better, then yeah, sure, use it, do it. It's okay.
I feel like I don't feel the abdomen, and I feel like I must force it to feel it. So sometimes.
Yeah, that's something that's going to really become very relevant now in the next practice, in the next session of the nostrils, is because it's much more subtle. As a beginner, often we focus there and we don't notice anything. And the tendency can be then to force the breath to get some more forceful sensations here, but we don't want to do that. So with the abdomen is just sit there. And you can also try to focus like on, of course, the rising and low of the abdomen is probably touching some clothing there. So just notice those sensations where the abdomen is, when it's rising and low, how it's touching the clothing. You can maybe try that, and that might help. But again, it's just stay there. Just stay there patiently. Don't force it.
Because if the breathing is shallow, so that we don't feel it.
Well, yes and no. I mean, now we don't feel it only because it's not because there's no sensations, it's because our mindfulness is not very good and clear. So again, and that's another point that comes up with the nostrils, is when the breathing really settles down, the sensations become more subtle. But actually that challenges us to pay closer attention. So it actually can help improve the clarity of our attention. So again, just be patient and just stay there and just notice very quietly. And you will notice after time, you'll start to pick up some sensations as stability and clarity improve. So again, just be patient. Anything else? Okay, what I'd like to do now for the rest of this session is go to this chart and have a look at the chart here in terms of, remember on the back up the top it said, shamatha is attained by progressing through the 9 stages, relying on the 8 antidotes to abandon 5 faults. So we've looked at the 8 antidotes and 5 faults. So how do we progress through these 9 stages? So the 9 stages are these sort of 9 diagrams on this windy road. Shamatha actually is the diagram up the top in the middle. So let's have a look, and most of the things I'm going to explain are listed on the back according to the various numbers, but let's go through some of the points. So if we start down the bottom, this first part of the diagram here is stage 1 of 9, and this is called setting the mind. So here we're just trying to set the mind on the object. And we've already seen that with the meditator, the rope in the left hand is mindfulness, the hook in the right hand is introspection. These are the 2 main tools we use. Then we have the elephant, which is the mind itself. The fact that it's black is symbolizing this dullness or laxity. The monkey is symbolizing conceptual thought in general. And the fact that it's black is symbolizing this excitement, the main type of distraction. So what we can see at stage 1 here is the monkey and the elephant are running wildly ahead of us, the meditator, meaning that our mind is out of control. So this is the first stage of setting the mind. What we simply notice at the first stage of practice is how chaotic and out of control our mind really is. Now, often when people come into this practice and never really have done this sort of practice before, then often we have this idea or this misconception that, my mind is not too bad. I get a little bit dull and distracted sometimes, but I think I should be able to focus on the breath okay, not too bad. And so, of course, when we sit down, we start to focus on the breath, and usually after 2 or 3 seconds, completely gone. And then often it's minutes later that we realise, hang on, I'm supposed to be focusing on the breath here. And we come back to the breath, and then after another 2 or 3 seconds, gone again. And minutes later, we come back again. And so, therefore, what happens is that when people have this experience, then they go, I can't meditate. I just can't meditate. In fact, it's worse. In fact, it's worse than that. I must be doing something wrong, because my mind is definitely more worse now since I've started to meditate than it was before. So I'm not only can't I meditate, I'm doing it wrong. Don't worry, you can meditate. This, in fact, is the first sign of progress, really. The first sign of progress is just to see how chaotic and out of control your mind really is. So you've made it to step 1. So good work. Good work. Because we've never looked at our mind like this, and so we're always distracted out. So we live in this illusion that our mind is not too bad. I can focus sort of okay. But it's only when we have to focus on a single object for an extended period of time we come to realise how chaotic and out of control our mind really is. So rather than getting upset and saying, I can't meditate, I must be doing something wrong, and then actually it's often worse than that, because often then when people have this experience in a group and then they open their eyes and look around, everyone's super still. I'm the only one who can't meditate. Everyone else is meditating well. I'm just hopeless. So don't have that thought. In fact, you can meditate. it's actually the first sign of progress. The first sign of progress is just simply to notice how chaotic and out of control our mind really is. So that is step one. Now, we see that these 9 diagrams go along this curvy road, and there are 6 sections of road. The first one, which the first state is on, is the road, or they're called powers, the power of hearing, which means to get to the first stage of practice on the road of the power of hearing, we need to hear about the instructions from a person or a book to what to do. And on that basis, we start the practice, we get to step 1. Then, of course, if we continue to practice, we'll get around to step 2, around the corner here, which here is called continuous setting. That doesn't mean, of course, we can continuously focus on the breath. And here at stage 2, what we see is that the elephant and the monkey are not running so fast anymore, and they have a little bit of white on the top of their head. And that white is this factor of stability and clarity, meaning by stage 2 of the practice, we're getting a little bit of stability and clarity. That sometimes what we notice is sometimes in our practice, we can focus on the object a little bit longer, maybe even a minute or 2, and then we get distracted. And often we're still distracted for quite long periods of time. But there are starting to be periods where we're a little bit more focused, and again, mind is a little bit more calm and focused maybe for a minute or 2, but then often very heavily distracted. Then if we go round the corner to step 3 or stage 3 of the practice here, which is called resetting, we notice a couple of new things. One, the rope of mindfulness now is tied to the elephant of the mind, which means now our mindfulness is getting a lot better. So much so that we can hold the object quite well. Maybe we can hold it for 5 or 10 minutes before we're distracted. And now when we're distracted, we quickly recognize that we're distracted and quickly come back. And so that is symbolized by the elephant turning its head backwards, meaning we quickly come back to the object when we're distracted. Here at stage 3, we notice the rabbit has come into the picture on the back of the elephant. The rabbit is symbolizing subtle dullness or subtle laxity. Now, by stage 3, we're focusing quite well. We can hold the object 5 or 10 minutes. If we get distracted, we quickly come back. So it seems like we're making a lot of progress. And it may even seem like we're close to finishing, getting to shamatha. Okay, mindfulness is getting better, but quality of focus is still a lot of work to do. And by stage 3, this subtle dullness starts to become a problem. Because now we can hold the object, but it's not very clear. And if we don't recognize that it's not clear, we can just stay stuck there. We won't progress. So now at stage 3, we need to start to recognize that our mind is a bit dull. It's not very sharply focused. Of course, the rabbit was there from the very beginning, but the first 2 stages we had much more heavy problems to worry about than a little bit of subtle dullness. So by stage 3, it really starts to become a bit of an issue. So therefore, we start to recognize when the mind is a little bit dull and sharpen the focus a bit more. And then if we continue the practice, we'll get to stage 4 here, called close setting. And by stage 4, now our mindfulness is getting very good, meaning we can hold the object the entire session without ever completely losing it. But still, the quality of our attention needs a lot of work. You may have already noticed now you can focus on your breath and think about other things at the same time. Mm-hmm. This is sort of static. This is, and now maybe it's that you're mainly thinking about other things, and a little bit in the corner of your mind, you're still sort of holding on to the breath a little bit. So then you need to get to the point where you're mainly focusing on the breath, and a little bit in the background, there's a bit of background chatter going on, and then eventually eliminate the background chatter. So it's like tuning a radio station like that. So here at stage 4, we still have a lot of this static, even to the point where the static, the distraction or the noise is mainly in the center of our focus, and maybe even our breath is a little bit on the edge, but we never lose the breath completely by stage 4. So we've still got a lot of work to do. And so that's why if you go around the corner to stage 5 and 6, now we see the hook of introspection is more prominent. So now introspection here on these middling stages is really quality control. Now as a beginner, introspection is about, am I falling asleep? Am I heavily distracted? Whereas by stage 4, 5 and 6, it's about fine-tuning. Fine-tuning. And the analogy often given here is the analogy of a guitar string. If a guitar string is too tight or too loose, it doesn't play well. Likewise, if our mind is too tight or too loose, it doesn't focus well. So we're constantly, like a guitar string, we're constantly fine-tuning our focus, balancing. And that's what we're doing over these middling stages, is fine-tuning our focus. If we're a little bit dull, sharpen. If we're a little bit agitated, relax. So that's what we're really doing. And so as we progress then over stage 5 and 6 and going around to stage 7, now we're getting very good in our shamatha practice. Now one other thing, the flame. If you go back down to stage 1, you see on the side of the path a big flame. The flame is the amount of effort we need in mindfulness and introspection. We need a lot of effort to hold the object. And as we progress along the stages, you'll see that it gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And by stage 7, the flame disappears. Which means by stage 7, it becomes effortless now. By stage 7, the rabbit is gone, saying goodbye to the monkey, hardly any black left on the back of the elephant. Now, all that we really need to do is a little bit of effort to start the meditation, and then effortlessly we can focus on the object without any hint of agitation or dullness. And so that really starts to become relevant at stage 8. Again, we can, by stage 8, just a bit of effort to start the meditation, and then it becomes completely effortless, and in a very clear way we can focus on the object without any hint of any subtle dullness or subtle agitation. Then by stage 9, we see the meditator and the elephant of the mind in the cave. By this stage, everything becomes completely spontaneous. And we can focus on that object spontaneously, without any effort, for at least 4 hours. No problem. Still, we haven't got to shamatha. To get to shamatha, after stage 9, if we continue to practice, what happens is we go through this radical transformation or transition in our body and mind. There's a radical realignment of subtle energies in the body. And that causes what's called physical bliss and mental bliss. We go through this state of having bliss in the body, bliss in the mind. And then as a result of that, that settles down. And then as a result of that, now our body and mind become completely flexible and serviceable. This idea of pliancy. And that's the next diagram in the middle at the top, shamatha. We see the person, the meditator, flying through the sky. That is symbolizing physical pliancy, the serviceability of our body. Because it's said that when we achieve shamatha, our body feels light like cotton. And we have no disturbance from our body, interference from our body at all. And then we have mental pliancy, which is symbolized here by the person sitting on the back of the elephant of the mind. Meaning now we can direct our mind to whatever we want without any resistance whatsoever. And so we have achieved shamatha at that stage. Then we have one more diagram here in the top right-hand corner. Now you see the meditator on the elephant of the mind. There's a flame and a sword in their right hand. This is the sword of wisdom. So this is symbolizing vipassana practice, insight practice. Now, on the basis of a calm, clear, focused mind, we can really engage in the Vipassana practice in an effective way and use a sword of wisdom to cut through ignorance, through our distorted view of reality. So that is symbolizing the Vipassana practice on the basis of shamatha. So that is very briefly the 9 stages. Anyone have any questions about anything in this diagram?
Can you explain the symbols between the...
Yeah, so that was what I mentioned before lunch, was the 5 sense objects that are the main source of distraction. So the bowl of fruit there, of course, is taste. Next to it we have silk cloth, so that is touch. Above that, the 2 round objects are symbols, so that's sound. Next to that we have a shell, a conch shell, with perfume in it, so that's smell. And then diagonally above that we have a round object, which is a mirror, so that's visual objects, visual form. So they are the 5 sense objects that are the main source of distraction. Anything else anyone would like to ask?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that shamatha is only one kind of concentration practice, and all these stages are describing only shamatha. Okay, so there are other practices and more stages.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Shamatha is the minimum level of concentration we need to develop as a basis for the other practices, particularly the Vipassana practice.
Okay.
But above shamatha, there are higher levels of concentration. We can go further. And there's actually 8 levels above. The 4 levels above are in Sanskrit called the 4 dhyanas. So these are what's actually, when we talk about concentration practice, particularly in the Theravada Buddhist traditions such as Sri Lankan Buddhism, Thai Buddhism, Burmese and so forth, when they talk about concentration practice, they normally talk about those, the 4 jhanas. The jhanas, they're called the jhanas. In the Mahayana Buddhist traditions like Tibetan Buddhism, Zen, Korean, Chinese and so forth, when we talk concentration practice, mainly we talk about this shamatha. But also in the Mahayana, of course, there's description of how to develop these higher levels as well, because the higher you develop, the better. But, you know, it takes effort, of course. And then above the 4 dhyanas, there are what's called the 4 absorptions, or samapatis in Sanskrit. And these absorptions are very high levels of concentration, but in terms of the spiritual path, they're not very helpful, because we become too absorbed to be able to, because in Vipassana we need to investigate.
Yeah.
But in those, we're so absorbed, we don't have that capacity anymore. I mean, of course, it's very calm and peaceful, but too absorbed.
Okay.
So, from a Vipassana viewpoint, the shamatha and the 4 dhyanas, all of those are very good basis for Vipassana.
Okay. Thank you.
Anything else from this diagram anyone would like to bring up? How long does it take? Often in the Tibetan tradition, in these meditation manuals, you'll see things like, you'll read things like, if you're someone of sharp faculty, 3 months. If you're someone of middling faculty, 6 months. If you're dull faculty, 9 months. I think that might be a little bit optimistic in our modern society. Because maybe we're starting from a little different starting point than people from centuries ago. Maybe our minds are a little bit more chaotic. And also our lifestyle more stimulus. So maybe also the conditions we live in a little bit different to you know, some nomad in the highlands of Tibet where everything's open and spacious and quiet. Maybe conditions are a little bit different as well. I'm going to, in tomorrow's practice, when we're going to look at the mind, I'm going to be referring to a book by Alan Wallace called Attention Revolution. Very good book about shamatha practice. and he comments on this point about how much effort we need. And he says that, you know, that according to modern studies, to develop a high level of skill in any technical field, music, anything, any ability, high level ability, you need 5,000 to 10,000 hours of practice, regardless of what that field is. That's standard in any field. If you want to become proficient in any skilled field, you need 5,000 to 10,000 hours of practice, whether it's music, some technical ability, golf, whatever. 5,000 to 10,000 hours of practice seems to be the number. So he's suggesting maybe we're talking these sort of numbers here. Why not? It's the same idea. So,
like 10 to 15 years.
Well, it depends on how much effort you put in, of course. I mean, of course, it depends on many factors. It depends on where we are now, our environment, our capacity, you know, all of these things. So there are many variables. But when we hear these sorts of things, then often people get very despondent and go, oh, I can't do that, it's impossible, I won't bother. I think that would be a big mistake. Because even if we put whatever effort we can manage into this practice, and we only get to stage 2 or 3, I mean, stage 3 is already way above the average person's attention skills. I mean, stage 3, we can focus on anything for 5 or 10 minutes without distraction whatsoever. And when we're distracted, quickly back. I mean, if we can do that in daily life, a lot of benefit. So whatever we can manage in this practice, we'll see that benefit in daily life. So we shouldn't think, oh, shamatha, too much, I won't bother. Because then we're not going to get any benefit from whatever level of commitment we can manage. So, and what you'll find, I think, is that the more commitment, the more you go, suddenly things change in your life and situations change, and then all new things open up to us. So therefore, that's the sort of the advice I give, is that whatever level of effort we can put into this practice, we will benefit from that. And then our life will improve. Yeah.
So if we don't reach shamatha, is there any point practicing vipassana?
Good. I was hoping someone would ask that question. From this diagram, what we are not to assume or understand from this is that we have to achieve shamatha before we begin vipassana practice. That's not true. And the analogy that I often give here is if we're building a multi-story building, if, let's say, even 2 floors, do we have to finish the first floor 100% before we start the second floor? No. But do we have to have a minimum sort of structure there in the first floor to begin the second? Yes.
What is the minimum?
Well, that's
Stage 3.
well, no, I mean, often they talk about stage 3 or 4. It's not the minimum, because there's no sort of like we have to achieve there, then we start. We can start vipassana practice now, but the thing is, if we put only effort into vipassana practice and no effort here, we're not going to get very far. So the more effort we put in the shamatha then, the more we progress, the more effective our vipassana practice becomes. And what you'll find, of course, is not just vipassana practice, the other practices, when you start to do those, they will feed back in as supportive conditions for shamatha. So they feed each other as well. So it's not just one-way traffic. So therefore, and we can sort of know from our own experience, if we're doing some sort of other practice, vipassana practice, if we're making any headway or not, because we're dull or distracted. So I think we can tell a little bit. And then, of course, if we have a qualified teacher, they can also balance that better for us. They can better say, well, I think you need to spend more time doing this and less that. So they can help us there, because they have gone through all of this. So they know what a good balance is, and they can see from us where we're at. So, of course, we don't have that experience. So that's why in these sorts of questions, it's often good to have a qualified teacher to help us to strike that right balance. That's very helpful. Otherwise, you know, often the question is, do we need do we absolutely need a teacher to progress in the spiritual path? Of course, the answer is no. But do we have unlimited time? No. So, you know, if we want to make our time effective, maybe it's helpful to have a qualified teacher. So therefore, a qualified teacher can really tailor practices to us